on. Okay. One more person coming in here. All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining us. You are participating in Managing God's Treasure, an essential guide to best practices, opportunities, and challenges in managing your endowment. You are going to hear from Bank of America, DNB's investment managers, as well as the trustees. I'm not going to spend too much time on this section here. We have our purpose statement, and DNB has been around for a long time. We're governed by a board of trustees. We offer two funds, a balanced and a values investing fund. We provide concierge services. Of the 152 parishes in the state of Connecticut, DNB represents 115 of those parishes participate in DNB, as well as 11 organizations. And like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I really would like to spend the time with Bank of America and the trustees to go over the deck. So I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, David, and you could give an introduction.
As long as I can figure out how to unmute this thing. So again, thanks everybody for coming. As some of you heard Kathleen mention, I guess the newest trustee. I've been a trustee now for just about a year. Before that time, I'd been treasurer of our parish and member of our investment council or investment committee. And so I guess I've got both sides of it now. I had the opportunity to work with DNB as a client, and so I could see the reporting and get a sense of the management processes there. And now on the other side of it, I get to see the way the sausage is actually made. So it'll be interesting to share some of that with you later. But I think the better part of the presentation will be Mark and Danielle talking to you from Bank of America, who are our investment managers. I think they've got a lot of insight that will be helpful for you to hear.
Great. I'm going to, I think, take up the next slide. So I'm Danielle. Well, this one actually, I'm going to start here. I'm Danielle Ward, and as mentioned, I'm with Bank of America. I'm an institutional client executive in our group that's dedicated to working with nonprofits, and I'm responsible for providing relationship management and client service to our largest and most complex institutional nonprofit relationships, including DNB. So it's a pleasure to be here this evening and share some of the different ideas around the best practices of endowment investing and some specifics around how we work with DNB. So the next couple of slides I'm going to go through is just really kind of high level investment and endowment basics. But here on this slide, I think the thing we wanted to highlight is that there are some really key differences between investing for individuals and nonprofits. You know, individuals typically invest to grow their wealth, to generate income, and achieve different personal financial goals, things like retirement or education funding. On the other hand, nonprofits invest to really support their mission and sustain their operations over the long term. So their investments aim to generate returns that fund programs, maintain operations, and grow reserves for future needs. Most nonprofits are designed to be perpetual in nature. That is, they have no time limit to their existence. And most are also substantially free from taxation on their income and distribution, and in many communities from property and other taxes as well. So these requirements and characteristics around a nonprofit activity is really to make sure that they benefit not any specific individual, but they're really, you know, you're supposed to benefit the nonprofit as a whole. And that's the basis for all of the governance, the investment policy, and the spending practices that you, as a member of your vestry's governing board, are charged with crafting and overseeing. And because of their perpetual nature, nonprofits' investment practices require a really unique balancing of interests. So the present day needs are always going to seem pressing, right? You need a new roof, and there's always a need to spend money today. And you really could think you could probably consume all the financial resources of your organization and potentially leave nothing for the future. So leaders of nonprofit organizations are charged with the duty of seeing that the needs of the future are also honored. And so this concept is usually referred to as intergenerational equity. And it's the principle that future generations of beneficiaries should neither be advantaged nor disadvantaged by the investing and spending activities taking place today. So in practical terms, this means that the endowment's purchasing power must be maintained after allowing for spending, inflation, and costs. And these aren't always easy to achieve, but there does exist principles and practices that vestry leaders can follow in pursuit of those objectives, and we're going to go over that tonight. So on the next page, we wanted to highlight fiduciary duty, because if you are a member of leadership at your vestry and overseeing investment assets, and certainly the trustees of D&B, they're all operating as a fiduciary. And Bank of America, we're operating as a fiduciary as well, a co-fiduciary with the trustees of D&B. And so it's really the legal basis on which all investment governance is built, and it's one of the highest standards of conduct in our legal system. You can think of it as a stronger version of the golden rule. So fiduciaries must always act in the best interest of the organization. There's three main fiduciary duties. The first is the duty of care. That requires that individuals act with reasonable care, skill, and diligence in their role with an organization. Examples in practice would include things like attending meetings regularly, reviewing the materials in advance, and being prepared to contribute to the discussion. Taking action to stay informed about the developments relative to your organization. Observing confidentiality with respect to information about your organization. The duties of care really means that your responsibilities need to be taken seriously, and you have to devote sufficient attention to serving the organization. The second is the duty of loyalty, and that requires that individuals act in the best interest of the organization they serve, avoiding conflicts of interest, and putting the organization's interests above their own. And the third is duty of obedience, and that requires that individuals comply with laws, regulations, and organizational policies and directives while carrying out their responsibilities within an organization. On the next page, I want to talk briefly about MIFA, and that acronym stands for the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. It's a state law that provides guidelines for the management and investment of charitable funds held by nonprofit organizations. And MIFA's prudent standard is designed to complement the fiduciary duties we've just discussed. The law also requires that fiduciaries use any relevant skills that they may possess in carrying out their responsibilities. There are some main requirements of a MIFA. First is prudent management. So nonprofits must manage their funds prudently, considering the purposes, terms, and goals of the organization. The second is standard of care. Nonprofits and their fiduciaries must exercise the care, skill, and caution that a prudent person would exercise in managing their own finances. The third is diversification. Nonprofits should diversify their investments to minimize risk unless it's imprudent to do so given the organization's circumstances. Number four is use of total return. So nonprofits can use a total return approach to managing their investments. That allows you to take both income and appreciation for charitable purposes. Number five is spending policies. So nonprofits should adopt spending policies that balance the need for current and future beneficiaries. That's that intergenerational equity we already talked about. And considering factors like the duration and preservation of the fund and different purposes of the organization and economic conditions. And then the last is review and monitoring. So nonprofits must regularly review and monitor their investment performance and adjust the strategies as needed to fulfill their fiduciary duty. And so all of these requirements really aim to promote responsible and sustainable management of charitable funds to support the mission and long-term viability of your nonprofit organization. So on the next page, what you see here is that when managing and overseeing your vestry's investment assets, there are really four main tools or levers that you can use to try to make sure you're meeting your fiduciary duty and following up MIFA and all these things that we're going to talk about. The four tools you really have are asset allocation, spending rate, spending methodology, and new fund flows. And we're going to review each of these in a little bit more detail over the next few slides. And so right now I'm going to invite Mark into the conversation, and he's going to cover the first tool, asset allocation.
Thanks, Danielle. So here we have a breakdown of how we're actually benchmarking and allocating the funds from a target perspective. What you can see is at the top, these are the different asset classes. To the right is kind of a 60-40 stocks and bonds portfolio and what that looks like. So a general 60-40 might be a benchmark that people are used to, and you know, can kind of understand how that's invested. We seek to be a bit more diversified than that. So we also include things like mid-cap and small-cap securities. We certainly want to have some liquidity that we're providing, so we do have a cash position in the portfolio. We add allocations to things like high-yield bonds, real estate, and commodity exposure because we are concerned about inflation, and we understand that that's a component of what we're trying to achieve is maintaining purchasing power of these assets. So we stay away from some of the things like private equity because as a specific asset class that is illiquid, it is also really impossible for us to be able to get out as we would desire if that manager is not doing something that we feel is in the best interest of the fund as well. So we've avoided that asset class, but we've embraced a much more diverse approach for the other asset classes. What that has enabled us to do is to kind of increase our expected return prior to fees, as well as improve our risk to return efficiency versus a 60-40 type portfolio. So that's kind of what we have adjusted the portfolio for. This is all within starting a basis of what is the purpose of this pool of assets, what asset classes would help us obtain our objective, and which asset classes may be inappropriate for these types of investments. And we go over this every year. We adjust. These statistics come from our Chief Investment Office at Bank of America, which has capital market assumptions. We update them every year. And those assumptions are looking forward for a 15-year investment horizon. What do we expect each subcategory's return to be? What do we expect their volatility to be? And what do we expect the intercorrelation of those asset classes? We then run an analysis, and this analysis has behind it another 30 pages of detail about potential outcomes, what we would expect in down markets and stress tests. And that's what we keep updating from an asset allocation perspective to really achieve the ability for you to spend, plus maintaining a higher inflation expectations moving forward, and achieve the cost of managing the funds as well. Maybe we'll go to the next page. And Danielle, did you want to cover diversification, or did you want me to cover that as well?
You can cover it. Thanks.
Okay, great. So from a diversification perspective, what does that mean? It does mean that, I would say simply put, having more asset classes will enable us to have a greater rate of return with incrementally less risk. So if all we owned was stocks and it was just large cap stocks, it's questionable whether that would have the diversification requirements to actually meet the MIFA standard of diversification first and foremost. Second, the volatility in a negative market, such as a 2008 situation, could see dramatic volatility swings. And we're looking to mute that a bit and ensure that we have a diversification enough so that we can attempt to limit volatility, though we know we have to take on a degree of risk to be able to achieve that required rate of return, which is that spend rate plus inflation. How can we do that with the minimal amount of risk possible? So that's what we use diversification for, and that's what we use the tool that you had seen previous to that, which is our portfolio planner as well. I can pause there if there are any questions at this point on kind of our asset allocation or how we came about that. Okay, if not, Danielle, did you want to touch on spending?
Sure. So I'll pick it up on the next tool, which is spending. And first, just to let everyone know what MIFA encourages around spending is really that you're going to adopt spending policies that balance, like we already said, that need of the current and future beneficiaries. And on this page, it's listing some of the things that spending policies should consider. So things like the duration of your particular fund, your charitable purposes, the economic conditions, the expected total return on your investments, other resources of the organization, which we'll talk about in another couple of slides, and the investment policy. And so pretty much like we've been saying, you know, the goal is really to support the mission while also preserving assets for the future. So how do you actually set it, right? On the next page, we show kind of a rule of thumb around setting the spending rate. And really, you can think about, you have a range of spending rates you could potentially set for your organization. But if you think about it, a lower spending rate means that you're taking less out. It means more of your endowment value will be available for the future, right? Because it's staying in the endowment to grow. And so that really does assist with that intergenerational equity concept. And if you're taking out more, then that means your endowment value is going to be lower, which means that there's less growth and less is available for the future. So you've got to find that sweet spot where you can serve both needs. And so in our experience and in practice, we see most nonprofits setting a spend rate between 4 and 5%. And like we've mentioned before, to maintain that long-term purchasing power, your asset allocation does need to generate an expected return over the long term that's going to exceed spending plus inflation, and ideally plus your costs too, because that's usually coming out of your investment portfolio. And so this often points to having a long-term return objective somewhere between 7.5% and 8%. So we give you an example here on the page where, say, the spend rate is 4.5%. Our long-term estimate for inflation for the next 15 years is 2.8%, and investment-related costs of 0.6 to 9%. So that means that you would need a target return of 7.99. And Mark had showed you earlier the portfolio, asset allocation that we've put together for D&B, and that expected return does exceed that. It's 8.7. So there's a nice healthy cushion there. We know markets aren't always going to perform the way we expect them to. There's going to be some down markets. There's going to be some more positive markets. But the idea is over time, you're going to hit that expected return. And if you can build in a little bit more than the actual required return, you are building in a little bit of cushion for market volatility and just to help grow the portfolio over time. The last thing I'll say about spending is that in addition to setting a rate, there's also different methodologies about how you calculate that, the actual amount. And there's lots of different things that nonprofits can use. It's a whole nother topic in of itself. But I would say the most common that we see clients use is a smoothing method. And so a simple example is just say you would apply your 4 or 5% spending rate to an average market value. So you would take the prior 12 quarter ending market values or the prior 3 years, average out that market value, and then apply your spend rate to that value. And that helps just smooth out the quarter to quarter volatility in market value that can occur when we're just living through different types of equity and fixed income market environments. On the next page, this is really just summing up kind of what we already just discussed. And it's the idea that as a fiduciary, people who are managing nonprofit investment portfolios are really trying to balance a lot of different needs and different constraints. So you want to try to seek the highest risk-adjusted return that is prudently achievable. You also want to spend as much as possible, but while still preserving that intergenerational equity. And with all that, you still want the least amount of fluctuation in spending from year to year, because it's hard to budget if your amounts are going up and down all over the place. So the art really of institutional investment management is balancing those different outcomes and finding an investment policy and spending policy that will meet all of those needs. And then the last tool that you have in your toolbox is new fund flows, and that's on the following page. And the reason this is important is if you're able to have new dollars floating into your vestry, it is one way to ease the burden on your investment portfolio of having to maintain the purchasing power and meet the required spending. If you have other dollars coming in, you could potentially spend less out of the investment portfolio and let that grow. And fundraising could be its own topic for a completely different training session. So I'm just going to share a couple of quick things to consider. So as many of you likely already know, giving to religious organizations has been on the decline for many years. But even with that, there is some encouraging news. About 1 in 5 affluent donors consider religious life in the top 3 issues they care about. That's according to our latest Bank of America study of philanthropy. We also saw in that study that the median gift given to religious organizations is about 6 times greater than the next highest category, which is basic needs. So those are some encouraging things to keep in mind. One thing to be also mindful of is that we've seen older individuals being significantly more likely to select religious life as a top priority compared to younger individuals, which certainly can impact donations in the years to come, but it also points to opportunities in plan giving for your different vestries. And the last thing I'll share in the fundraising category is just the fact that 1 in 10 affluent individuals say they receive the most valuable information or direction regarding their charitable decision-making from a religious leader. So that is very encouraging, and I think an opportunity for your different organizations. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Mark to talk about investment policy statements. Mark, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We did see a bit of what a diversified portfolio looks like. We saw what our target asset allocation looks like to accomplish goals and how we come about kind of thinking about that. Now, once we kind of have those discussions, once we do that analysis, once we come to the conclusion of the best allocation for the most appropriate allocation for what we're trying to accomplish, we memorialize that in an investment policy. That investment policy is a document that will state what our target allocations are, what ranges in which Bank of America will be managing those assets, and what benchmarks are most appropriate to measure us against in regards to that as well. So those are some of the things that the investment policy goes. It will also define the fiduciary responsibility, obligations, and oversight of investment committees, how those things are measured, and who is charged with what responsibilities and duties, and enable us to enforce that via document. This is a living and breathing document. It is reevaluated and adjusted accordingly and amended as changes are appropriate to it as well. But it is definitively a governing document that is really required as a best practice to be able to manage funds accordingly and to be able to hold those responsible accountable, such as Bank of America, in light of what we're able to produce for you as far as returns and asset management. Some of the highlights are on page 14. I don't know,
We're going to pass this over to David. Yeah.
Okay.
Although Mark, you could probably deal with it a lot better than I can. You've been involved longer, but let me give it a shot. Now, because Mark had been talking about investment policy statements, and what we've got on this slide are some of the things that that articulate the themes that we've got in our 2 investment policy statements. With more than $157 million of assets under management, we have critical mass to allow us to have to retain professional managers to allow us to meet these objectives effectively. Bank of America, as you've heard, we have a group that specializes in working with nonprofits and complex nonprofits such as ours. Periodically, we, the donation bequest trustees, will reevaluate who our manager is. I think most recently in 2021, we went through the process of looking at 2 or 3 or 4 different firms, and B of A was the one that emerged as best suited to continue managing our endowments. I think the other thing that this slide really highlights is the risk tolerance bullet. One of the things that we recognize is being able to attain that roughly that 7.99 or 8% return that we need to see over a long period of time involves the acceptance of risk. We're not naive, we know we need to do that, but that risk has got to be closely monitored and managed. Yesterday, we had our quarterly review session with Bank of America, and one of the things that we spent a good deal of time on was how our portfolio has performed against our benchmark and against a straight 60-40 sort of mix in terms of both return and risk. And what is most important, at least from my perspective on that, is that we consistently have been able to marginally exceed the return expected on the benchmark, but do it with less risk than would have been expected for that. I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is portfolio restrictions. We are an organization that's got individual or unique concerns, and you'll notice that the investments in Russia are prohibited. As soon as the Russians invaded the Ukraine a couple of years ago, we went to B of A and said we've got to be out of Russian investments, and they were nimble enough to get us out of there very quickly and to ensure that the managers we're working with are not investing in Russia. And Teresa, can you flip to the next slide for me, please? What you see here, we've got there are two investment funds that we offer to our clients: our Balanced Fund, our Values Investing Fund. The Balanced Fund is almost $150 million as of the end of March, and is a multi-asset class portfolio exposure across a broad mix of U.S. and international. Mark had talked about our investment policy statements. On an annual basis, we'll sit down with Bank of America and review those IPSs. We'll define permissible asset classes. We'll define the allocations that Mark shared with you on page 7 to lay out what we, if you will, the game plan for the year. Do that for both funds, the Balanced Fund and the Values Fund. But neither one is done as a set it and forget it. Each of these funds is dynamically managed by Bank of America on a continual basis and by the trustees on at least a quarterly basis. As I mentioned, we meet with them every quarter. Coincidentally, we had our session yesterday, and we talk with them about the broad economic parameters that they see that the bank brings to us, but how those might have changed, how the markets have been reacting to them, and how we should be reacting to those in turn. Yesterday, again, we go through the broad view of how the portfolio is doing, how our investments are doing, and we also can spend time on individual specific things. Over the last 6 months, we've added hedge funds to the mix in the Balanced Fund. Done so in a very managed way. We don't want, I think Mark touched on the fact we want to make sure we have liquidity. So we've invested with managers that would give us daily liquidity. But the strategy that Bank of America has employed for us, which they articulated a good deal of depth yesterday, is one that makes a lot of sense for our funds going forward, because we're again looking for additional diversification. We're looking for ways to temper the volatility, perhaps reduce our risk a little bit, at the same time giving ourselves another source of return to help us over time. Similarly, we had a good conversation yesterday about why certain assets or asset classes are overweighted or underweighted, and what things might have to happen for those to change over time. So what I really would just want to stress is that the management of this thing is not a put it to the side. We're very involved on a very continuing basis. On the right-hand column, you're seeing the Values Investing Fund. This was established 6 years ago by D&B because we wanted to give an option for those clients who wanted to invest on an ESG basis to do so through D&B. The broad parameters are the same as our Balanced Fund, i.e., we're managed by Bank of America. We have an annual review of our investment policy statement. We are very, very conservative about the risk profile and obtaining returns within that. But it does have the additional set of filters that will allow you to meet an ESG objective if that's where you would want to be. Again, Bank of America manages this fund for us as well. I think I now turn it back over to either Mark or Danielle to give us more of an in-depth dive into how they look at that.
Yep, thanks, David. I will talk a little bit about how we are managing the Values Fund and really our overall approach to what we typically call sustainable and impact investing. And I know it's getting a lot of press and news about ESG, and it's been heavily politicized over the last couple of years. The way that we approach it is, first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, we're a fiduciary. And so any type of strategy, whether it has ESG in the name or not, needs to meet our risk and return objectives first and foremost. It has to be a good fund, a good manager, It needs to give the types of returns that we're expecting from, say, a large cap growth strategy, whatever the strategy may be, before we would even consider it. Doesn't matter what the ESG-ness of it is, right? But if it does pass muster on our risk and return objectives, then we do take a very close look to see if it's being intentional about the way it uses environmental, social, and or governance factors in making investment decisions. And all ESG investing is really about is taking those non-financial factors, the ones that are material, right? So making sure that if it's an energy company, obviously its energy use is pretty material to its bottom line. If it's a bank, its governance is very material to its bottom line. So making sure that the factors that are looked at matter to the financial outcomes of that company, and using them to help make better investment decisions. So it's really about additional information and additional things you can consider when making the investment decision. So, and really taking that broader perspective at looking at different companies and different investments. So any manager on our platform, after it's gone through the regular due diligence assessment, when we start to dig in and see if we would consider it a sustainable or impact strategy on our platform, we're looking, using this sort of framework that's on the slide here, we're looking to see what really is their approach to impact. That is the avoid, benefit, and contribute. So that's the x-axis of the chart. And then we look at the depth of integration. So looking at the approach of impact first, there is a well-known framework in the industry that was developed by the Impact Management Project that laid out these three terms of avoid, benefit, and contribute. And avoid, what you can think of there is really, are there certain areas that you think are either risky or not aligned with your values? So you can think of things like, for the instance that we already gave, investments in Russia, not aligned to your values. Maybe for-profit prisons, not aligned to your values. I think people, if you want to divest from something, it would certainly fall under this approach. But you're really trying to avoid things that you think could contribute to risk in your portfolio. So that's as simple as it sounds. You can screen these things out of particular managers, or you could seek managers that as part of their investment process, they are automatically screening out some of these things that align with your needs. The second category, benefit, is really about shifting your exposure to stronger ESG firms. So thinking of you're really trying to look for companies that are sustainable and competitive and profitable because they're thinking about the environmental, social, and governance factors, as well as all of their stakeholders when they're managing their business. So a lot of companies that will fall in this category will be companies that have just made this part of their overall way they operate. And then the contribute category is where it gets to be a little bit more tangible impact. So these are going to be companies that are trying to have solutions to global challenges. So some examples would be healthcare, renewable energy. And these strategies really come with a measurable impact that is intrinsic to the financial performance of the strategy. So in the public markets, a lot of strategies are going to fall in the middle in the benefit category. Some contribute, and then as you move into more private strategies, then in private markets, that's where you get a lot more of the contribute. The dimensions, the 1, 2, and 3, is really more about the intensity and the depth of integration. So the more that these things are integrated into their process, the higher the number. So it's actually kind of better to be a 3. So the most impact that you're going to have on here would be a C3, for example. But essentially, every manager on our platform that is a sustainable impact strategy is measured in this type of framework and is assigned a rating. And that's something that we have shared with D&B just on which managers in the values portfolio are sustainable and impact strategies. Over 60% of the portfolio is in dedicated impact or sustainable strategies. And then we've also shared, how we're classifying these particular strategies and have had conversations about them. So with that, I am going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it back to Mark. He's going to touch on performance before we turn it back to David and Kathleen to help wrap us up.
Great, thank you. So performance is not a straight line. When we talk about a 15-year time horizon that we're looking forward, and we talk about something closing in on an 8.7 expected rate of return with how we're trying to allocate the portfolio, that's not each and every year. It's certainly not each and every quarter. And you can see that just within the last 5 years, where you see the portfolio returns of even a 60-40 blend up or down close to 15% in one direction or another each of those calendar years. So we are dealing with the more volatile times. Again, we need to take on some degree of risk to be able to achieve the longer term rate of return, but that does not happen each and every year. Return comes due to 3 reasons, and I think you've heard a little bit about each one thus far, but just to kind of frame it out a bit. We talked a lot about strategic asset allocation. A large portion of our returns will come from that strategic asset allocation that we determine is our target. Again, creates our benchmark and measurement, and determines kind of how much we have in each asset class as a neutral position. In addition to strategic, we have tactical. Our tactical asset allocation comes from Bank of America's viewpoint of where are markets versus what do we see going on in the economy. At Bank of America, we do touch 1 out of every 2 households in this country, whether that's due to a bank account, a mortgage, a credit card, an auto loan. And we aggregate all that data every 2 weeks, and our CIO office looks at that data, looks at how the markets are interpreting what's going on in the economy, and we determine if there is a disconnect, and that really leads us to where our overweights and underweights are. The U.S. consumer is 70% of U.S. GDP, so it gives us a decent finger on the pulse and a bit of an information advantage to be able to make those decisions. Our CIO office is very clear about when we make changes. We're clear about where we stand every month, and we are very transparent about when we do make an adjustment to our tactical weights, why we're doing it. We've been doing it that way for over 16 years, and we've been able to add value over that period of time to our clients' portfolios. To be honest with you, I don't know of any other company that can kind of make that statement and have those material numbers behind them as well. So we're proud of our ability to do that. The third source of return, I would call it, strategic, tactical. The third would be our execution. That's our manager selection. That's making a determination of we use potentially a passive or indexes. Sometimes it helps with liquidity. It helps us make adjustments cheaply in the portfolio. We don't think that active managers always outperform, so it does give us that. We also use active managers who specialize in certain areas like large cap growth or mid cap value. And we select managers there that we believe are positioned to take advantage of the markets that we expect and be able to add some additional value as well to the portfolio. It also gives us the flexibility to tilt the portfolio either towards things like growth investments or value investments, dividend yielding, or shorten bond maturities or lengthen them. So it gives us that flexibility to be able to actively manage the portfolio in a way to attempt to achieve those longer term expected rates of return. So this is how it looks on kind of a year by year basis. I think if we look at the next page, it's going to show us kind of as of today, looking back, what we've seen. So over 3 months, the first quarter has we've seen about a 9% rate of return in the portfolio. We don't always outperform the benchmark, different types of portfolios, different types of time periods. We will either under or outperform slightly depending on what's occurred. As we go longer term, we would hope that trend emerges, that we've been able to add value. Sometimes diversification doesn't work, but over the long term, again, we expect that to add value on a return basis as well as reducing risk. Clearly, on a 1 year basis, you can see we've much more than exceeded that kind of annual average. Over 2 years, when we take into account the downturn of 2022, we're below that average. 3 years, we start to come back towards it. And over 5 years, interestingly enough, you see exactly that 8.7 number that we had forecasted for the portfolio that we have looking forward for the next 15. It's not always exactly that accurate, I would tell you. And again, it's clearly not that smooth in one direction. So we have to understand that there is market volatility. We do take on some degree of volatility and risk in the portfolio. But the reason for that is to be capable of achieving what you see over the past 5 years, which is that 8.7% rate of return. The difference between the pooled fund and the values fund is virtually nil. But there will be some dispersion between the two, depending on what's been going on in the markets and what's been driving kind of market returns. Over the long term, we do expect both of these funds to achieve the long-term results that we see here on this page. And in both cases, we've been able to add value above and beyond that kind of static benchmark of a 60-40. And we're proud to make that statement as well. I'll take a pause there. Not sure if where we go from here. Danielle, is this back to you?
Back to David.
Okay, I'm sorry. Back to David.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Mark. No, this slide is as you're considering whether you want to work with us on the values fund, gives you some of the suggested to do and some reading lists that will help you get smart on it. A lot of education that's needed for it. So this is just a laundry list of things that will help you do that. The next slide, Teresa, please. And then just sort of closing slide, I guess two things we didn't really touch on, but I want to just make sure we mention them is we've talked a lot about investment and portfolio management. Two things we did not talk about, but everybody should be aware of is one, the reporting services that we provide, which I think are, again, from my perspective as a treasurer of a parish, were terrifically helpful. And two, that the ability for each parish to manage its own distribution rate, take out what it thinks it needs of its investments on an annual basis, set that for the annual basis and take it out monthly. Again, terrifically helpful and something that was essential to the job as treasurer. The last thing I would mention is that we do have our quarterly portfolio reviews. We had one yesterday with Bank of America, and the slides from that are now posted. I think are now posted online, so everybody can see those and get some of that in-depth view that they gave us. With that, I guess if we have questions either now or if anything that would come up after this.
If I could just add, my name is Kathleen Court, for those I didn't introduce myself to earlier. I've worked very closely with David. I do want to say, and I really want to get your input here before we sign off, because if you have any questions, we do encourage you to share today or reach out to Teresa DuPont if you have any questions. We're happy to follow up with you directly. In fact, I think I said to Bill earlier today, who's just coming on as a new treasurer for his parish, David and I, and actually many of the trustees that serve on D&B have been in your shoes, and we're happy to consult with you and give you any guidance that you might need in addition to what D&B can do for you in terms of helping with your endowment. So any questions, if we can just take a pause, any comments or questions, we welcome.
Oh, sorry, wrong avatar there. I apologize. I'm a newbie. I've just joined the vestry at Christ Church in Trumbull. And when we do our budget, obviously we have our own funds, and some have restrictions, and some have, they're restricted to certain uses or the principal's restricted. As I understand what I heard here tonight, all of that is managed at the diocesan level. And when we put in for our draw, it's reviewed. How do you know which fund we're taking from? Is that for us to tell you, or how does that work?
Well, I think the answer is yes, if you have multiple funds with DNB, you tell us which one should be giving how much money each month. And that's how we'll set it up. So
Okay,
it is the parish's decision how you take your money out.
but you check up and make sure we've got the money to draw on.
Yes, yes,
But it's our responsibility to make sure if there is a restriction, let's say that a certain fund was given just for the maintenance of the building, or not for operating. It's
that's
our
correct.
responsibility to make sure that if we're pulling 10,000 from that, it's for an appropriate purpose.
Correct.
It's both. It's both. I have, in the DMB archives, we have records of the restrictions. And when a request comes through, part of my due diligence is to make sure that the parishes are pulling from the appropriate funds, and the vestry minutes are required to take withdrawals out of DMB also.
And one follow-up question, do all the parishes in the diocese keep their money in this managed fund at the diocesan level, or do some have their own, or?
Some
no,
have their own.
Okay,
But most are with DNB. I think, what is
Yeah,
it, 115 out of 150 or
50.
something.
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure. I'm going to put out a pledge or a big ask to all of you who are here, and of course, if you would extend this ask to others that you may know who are interested. We welcome and invite you to consider being part of the DNB trustees. We actually go through a pretty thorough review process. I'm not sure how I got on here, but we do go through very a good due diligence and process. But we are always looking for people who have backgrounds in financial investing, et cetera. So if this might be something that you might be interested in considering, again, reach out to Teresa DuPont. We'd be happy to talk to you more about it. And so we're always looking for talented people who are interested in this area. So don't hesitate to reach out if that's of interest to you.
I would add one thing that maybe we didn't touch on, and that is just that these portfolios are customized for donations and benefits. So 100%, right? It starts with what's the purpose of these assets? What are we trying to achieve? And everything from the strategic asset allocation to the manager selection process is all customized specifically for you. And you should know that. I personally only work with philanthropic nonprofit clients. I only have 20 of them, and that's by design. So this is my only area of focus. All of my clients are going to live forever. They all have spend rates they need to achieve. None of them pay taxes, right? So I do have a unique kind of perspective with that. They're all mission based, and it's my honor to be able to serve in that regard. But I do want you to realize it is not model portfolios coming from a big bank. These are customized for you with the resources of a large bank and a large institution at our backing. But that and then we try to bring that power to be able to allow you to accomplish your mission. So thank you, and I just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think if there's no further questions, I think I just want to thank everybody for participating. It goes without saying with the spring training and being a fiduciary and being part of management of endowment is a team sport. And it involves a lot of different people, many who are represented here, and partnerships with great firms like Bank of America, and Danielle and Mark have done a terrific job for us. So we thank you for participating, and we're always available. If you have any questions or want to consult with us on anything, we're happy to have a conversation with you about it. So once again, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the thumbs up, Angela. Appreciate it. Okay.